Hey there, it's been a minute since I updated Fighting Dreamers, and full disclosure, I wasn't, super passionate about it, 2 years back. I think I was starting to get, fatigued by it, because it kept going, and it was the only thing I thought about for a while. Then last year happened, which I am not going to elaborate on, but just know that it was so distracting that now the series, or at least, my passion for the series is on life support. I do still like the characters, and I think, in retrospect, I probably should have taken, more hiatuses, or at least, taken a full break for a while to actually get back into them. But now it's I kind of don't want to continue the series as it is. There's so many issues. I started it in 2014, and I'm just not feeling it, and if I were to do it, if I'm gonna do it again, I'd rather just, reboot the whole thing in, a different format. I don't want to leave you guys hanging, however, so here is a very, very abridged version of the rest of the plot. Obviously spoilers, but at this point, the spoilers are kind of redundant, considering it's not going to be in comic form. It's just me talking about it for however long this takes. Since it's so abridged, I'll probably make little side comments of what I would have done had I started it now, or at least, elements that I wish I included as I'm talking about the thing in the chapter. So, I'm sorry for that in advance. And this was low-key an excuse to use this 3D model for something. Look at me, look at how cool I look. I am not doing 3D for the rest of this, though, because I cannot do that fast enough, and I'm better at sketches in, Storyboard Pro or something, which I have again. Anyway, just a quick disclaimer about the plot in general. As I go abridged as hell on this thing, I will forget details and add them in after the fact because I don't want to do the voiceover 3 times in a row. And just in general, if something just seems off or weird, or maybe even a little bit problematic about, the plot and stuff, just take it with a grain of salt. I would have refined it when I got there, but at some point, developing the story got a little bit less interesting, and just the further we go, it's like a weather report, the further we go out, the further it's gonna turn into that stuff and get more brief. So I apologize in advance, just imagine it's more nuanced and cool than it actually is. Alright, on with the video. So we left off at Patch's brother Luke being incredibly ominous with some prediction about 4 of them, and Stewie is understandably concerned, but before you can even register what the heck is even happening, he is tackled by Molly and immediately gets yeeted back into the portal room. Molly, in her non-verbal way, tries to describe that, her friends are in there, Ghost and Miles are inside the universe, and Stewie takes a second to register what in the heck she's talking about, because Molly doesn't talk much, if at all, and then he figures it out, and then Miles and Ghost have been in there for at least 40 minutes, or not even that, maybe a half hour, and they are just having a grand old time fighting off monsters. Even Ghost is doing a decent job, flinching and attacking out of instinct, but doing pretty good. Miles is, full on into it, though. And in comes Stewie with some borrowed gear that would have been a shout-out to, the version of him I drew back in, high school in the 2000s, and he is what are you doing in here? Miles is I punched out 2 shark monsters, and also, we're just in a simulation, right? And Stewie just stares at them no, you're not. I mean, sure, yes, whatever, why are you in here? And Miles explains Ghost's whole situation. Stewie has a moment of, kinship, because, he doesn't understand the full scope, but he understands the whole, thinking that they're too powerful and dangerous to, actually use their powers, and Stewie delays just long enough for the portal to just... it's gone. Stewie panics for a second, and he's okay, you know what? I have enough experience. I've been doing this recruit thing for a month. I could probably figure it out. I'm technically the leader, right? Because, you guys are basically my, recruits on this age scale. We can figure this out. And then a screaming monster comes out, the S-Class, and screams at them. Ow. And then Ghost screams back at the thing, just mimicking perfectly. And Miles is hype as all hell because, look at that, he's doing cool powers. Stewie is concerned. He knows what monsters are. He had that drilled into his head of all the monster types and how dangerous they are. So seeing Ghost do that, Ghost registers his instinctual fear more than they register Miles' is pure delight at the fact that Ghost is using their powers. Ghost's powers are still very underdeveloped, though, so it doesn't totally take down the S-Class. And it readies up for another attack when a blast of blue lightning comes and just bodies the thing with a sword. Why is Flint here? Oh, it's Francis. Hi, Francis. Flint is equally confused. Didn't you just respawn? I did. Then why are you here? These two are here. Why are these two here? I don't know, honestly. I wanted Ghost to show off his powers. What? Look, I was just here trying to do some one-on-one training with Francis here, because, you know, your whole thing with, like, treating him equally, and here I don't even understand. How did you even get in here? Which is significant because the odds of two different teams coming into the same world at the same time, within seconds of each other, is incredibly rare. But not impossible. A different monster from a higher danger scale, probably like a T or something, comes in, and Ghost, having just learned how to scream at things, screams at it, startling everyone. And even Flint looks over at them like, oh my god, you have a C-Class, I'm gonna kill it. And everyone panics and like, no, he's a kitten, stop. It's a bit of a mess as Stewie and Miles are shouting with Flint, trying to hold him back, because they know very well that Ghost is a real kitten, and they were in the kitten training classes, and they can prove it, and Flint is very, very understandably concerned and angry at the fact that, no, this is a C-Class, what the heck are you talking about? Francis is kind of, like, quietly trying to get their attention, hey guys, and then he yells, everyone stops, turns around. The monster's fuzzy. It stopped moving. Stewie and Miles don't get it, and even Francis is a bit clueless as to why this happened. Flint knows exactly what this is. It's a Y-Class. For the record, a Y-Class monster is not really a monster as much as like a calling card for a Z-Class about to attack. The monsters freeze in place, turn into like fuzzy, mossy fungus things, and it's basically like a big old target for a Z-Class pillar to come crashing into the world. So they have about 30 seconds to get the hell out. So they book it. Ghost is lethargic, but not necessarily sleepy, because they can't really sleep, and Stewie just grabs him and runs with everyone else. And thanks to Flint's quick thinking, and Francis being the one in charge of the portal, and actually doing pretty well under pressure, they all, like, fall out of the portal, back into the room that Flint came in from, and just as, like, the monster was, like, just slamming into the world, like, as the portal closes, you can just see them go, Thum! And then the door closes. They have a second to collect themselves, and Flint finally is like, what the hell is Ghost? And Stewie is also kind of like, I'm not sure. Miles is like, they're my friend. Ghost is frantically signing, please do not tell anyone. I am going to be locked back into the room. I cannot do that. Please do not tell anyone. I have these powers. It's going to be very dangerous. I will be very dangerous. People will think I'm dangerous, and just keeps going. Not to mention that Stewie, Miles, and Ghost, having basically soloed a universe, Ghost and Miles having minimal training, would be in serious trouble. And both Stewie and Flint surprisingly registered that, given how Ghost was panicking, they would get the worst of it. Flint senses the same energy as Patches and her being targeted because she happened to be third-born in a place that was, like, really into the third child thing. And even though, like, the monster thing was kind of, like, a bit of a wild card, they were just a kitten. Stewie is 100% ready to take the fall. Like, he's willing to pretend that the kittens encountered him, they followed him inside, this was all his idea. But then Flint is like, hold on. We cut to Duncan and some of the security cats following him, and also a few medical cats, because whenever either a respawn or a Z-Class attacks, which are both registered in the portal rooms, they come running in case anyone is hurt. And the only two there are Flint and Francis. And they're looking at him like, good lord, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, fine, just got spooked, maybe a little bit scuffed up, but I can handle it. Francis also acknowledges this and just nods in a similar body language way of saying, yeah, I'm fine too. They are confused as to why Duncan and the team are there, and then they see Molly kind of following along, holding his tail. And Duncan's like, yeah, this one was telling me about the fact that her friends are missing or something. And I was also kind of looking around for a destructive kitten that apparently turned the power off in one of the gymnasiums. Have you guys seen them? I think their names are like Ghost and Miles. Flint does a good fake of, like, he doesn't know what they're talking about and just happened to hear this information and goes, yeah, I'm not sure actually. Wait, hold on. Is one of them a Sphinx? And he just points out a corner of the room that he had told them to hide in like 30 seconds ago. Miles explains that they were scared about the power outage, and Ghost is especially scared, and they booked it, so Miles went over to comfort his friend. And then Molly went over to comfort the two of them. Ghost being so terrified that they're going to be found out that they perfectly method act the fact that they were scared by the power outage, and then suddenly Flint and Francis popping into the room and seeing the end of a Z-Class attack. Duncan is like, oh, God, I'm sorry. How about I lead you guys back to the kitten training area? It looks like you guys got very lost. Molly just quietly cuts in with, I run very fast. And Duncan's like, you sure do. All right. Well, you two seem to be good. I'll let the medical guys check you out just to be sure. But, report the Z-Class sighting to Pickett, and just, have a good night, okay? Like, be safe, please. And Flint and Francis give a nod as Duncan walks out with Ghost and Miles, and most of his security guards, which are maybe one or two that were with him. The third one stays to help out with the medical guys. On his way out, he encounters Stewie, who has not changed out of the gear yet, and he looks over and is like, oh, hey, Stanley? I just heard you passed the security exam. Well done. I can't wait to have you as one of my team later. Stewie does, a slow nod, a little noise of, acknowledgement and, a thumbs up. And, Duncan's like, oh, don't worry, you don't need to be so shy. Good job, buddy. And then does, a backslap and just keeps going. Miles and Ghost giving him eye contact, and Stewie, as Duncan is walking away, giving them eye contact, I can't believe that worked. And then, both of them go their separate ways. As Flint catches up and starts walking and talking with Stewie, he goes, you're darn lucky I listened to Luke. He's precog dominant, you know. He always gives out, these 5-word blips of the future, and he told me, cover for them, and you should probably leave now to your mission. And all of his visions are confusing as hell. But, I don't ever not listen to them anymore, only for the fact that the last time I didn't listen, Patches respawned. Stewie double takes because Patches never mentioned this, and he's like, oh yeah, this was 2 years ago, and we were being dumb. See, we lived in a branch where, everyone was super, super into being, grandchildren of Bastet, and, the third kid who's born in a set of 3 is automatically the bad luck one. No matter what happens, it's always their fault, and they're influencing their siblings, or something stupid like that. They're watched like hawks, while other cats, who aren't even, a set of twins or something, the twin cats will get away with everything, but the third-born, they so much as breathe the wrong direction, and they're just, it's stupid. And me, being a genius, was why don't we go into a universe? Or it's a sim one, it's fine. We'll go in a simulation universe, and we're gonna have some bonding experiences, you're gonna get experience, I will take the fall, it will be fine. Luke said something about, how we're gonna lose a life, and me, again, being stupid, was oh, come on, you're being all worrisome, it's fine. Although, to be fair, we didn't realize he was precog dominant at the time. And you'll never guess what happened. A G-Class came in and busted us up. We were lucky that Luke was outside to begin with, and he had called in some help, and both of us lost a life. As expected, Patches got into trouble, and then at the same time, Mom was like, okay, we can't live here in this branch anymore, and we moved to this branch. They are considerably more chill about, the third child thing. I don't even think they care in here, so that's nice. Stewie kind of cuts him off in the middle of the rambling part, and goes wait, you respawned? What did that look like to you? And Flint goes, oh, I just saw, a copy of myself or something. We were staring at each other, and then I fell down into a void, and then I woke up in a hospital bed. What about you? What did you see? Stewie notices that nothing about a cat skull or two other echoes of cats trying to drag him away were any part of this. So he just says, like, yeah, I saw the same thing. That's it. Anyway, Patches is fine now. You should probably go see her. She's worried about you. And Flint just kind of walks off, and Francis goes like, I'll see you back in the dorms, okay? And, like, Stewie just nods and keeps on walking. And then we get some parallel shots of Stewie walking back in the medical dorms and Ghost walking around the scientific area. Both of them kind of determined. Well, Ghost is more determined than Stewie is. And then we see Ghost walk up to Daisy, and Daisy's like, oh, hey, what's up? I heard about it. And then Ghost is like, what am I? Daisy has a look of fear and then resignation as she goes, I was hoping to tell you this when you were older, but you should know. Meanwhile, Stewie finds Patches, and Sandy is also there too. Sandy being like the supportive girlfriend, and then kind of backs off, and then doesn't back off as much when she realizes, oh, that's Stewie, okay, it's fine. And Stewie is, like, you know, sitting with them and saying hi, and Patches is like, where have you been? And he's doesn't have the gear on anymore, but he still kind of has, like, the collar and realizes he has the collar on, and it's like, don't worry about it. So how are you guys doing? And they just so happen to stand in the same manner as he stood in the respawn void, with Patches on his right and Sandy on his left. And, like, Patches does, like, one of those, like, comforting arm touches thing, and Sandy does, like, a cool shoulder tap thing, as they both kind of are about to be like, yeah, you know, we're all chill, that was cool. And then they have a moment of recognition where, like, something just snaps in their brain, and they register it. Without even thinking, all three of them, one by one, show off the arm scars. Stewie seeing his for the very first time. And they look at each other. They're the Alpha Trio. Okay, so now here's my afterthoughts portion of this bit of the chapter. God, I wish I had made Francis Stewie's friend from the beginning, you know, like, take Trent out entirely and just make Stewie and Francis friends. They were friends for a while. Then Stewie got a little bit way too overprotective, and Francis was like, okay, I'm not really feeling it. And then, like, you know, they could have had, like, a thing where they're like, oh, they're roommates, and Francis isn't as happy as Stewie is about it. And then, like, they have a falling out, and it would have been so good had I planned out. So now Francis just kind of vanishes, or would have vanished in this version of the plot. In the eventual Fighting Dreamers reboot, it wouldn't be the same main three here. It would be a different set of three, and they would be, like, our three would be the previous Alpha Trio. So I can just recycle that whole thing into a different character in this new reboot of the series. Also, how do I discipline these cats? Like, genuine question. I am not entirely sure how something like Stewie getting in that world with the kittens, how would that go down had nothing happened? Like, how do you discipline cats that spend time doing dangerous stunts out in various worlds to fight monsters and possibly die out there? Like, the whole sparring illegally thing is just a slap on the wrist, and quite honestly, probably isn't as huge of a deal. It's just, like, leader-specific. Like, maybe Pickett doesn't like it that much, but some other leaders are chill with it. It's subjective, but that's nothing compared to this. That will be something to work on in the reboot when I get to it. Quick reminder for people catching this as it uploads. There is a little bit of weirdness to it because I didn't develop this further. So, take the things that sound weird or even are in pre-alpha with a grain of salt. Let's get going. The chapter starts off with Sandy, approximately 8 months old, or a month into her recruit years, as one of her teammates, the leader teammate, is just giving her flack for everything she is doing. She is doing it wrong. Way to go, prodigy child. Are you gonna aim for the monster this time? And just going on and on and on. And Sandy, who at this point was more meek and actually kind of a bit of a crybaby, was starting to get overstimulated and just not trusting herself. And then her first-year teammate, Oscar, comes on the line and is telling her, hey, it's fine. Just breathe and do this, and you'll be great. That's basically the high dynamic. Vic, the leader, is rude as all hell, and maybe even very bitter about the fact that she's getting all of the perks of being a superstar, while they work their tail off and don't even get any recognition, which is obviously from their viewpoint, not everyone else's. And then Oscar, her first year, is very sweet, very understanding, and balances things out, kind of calls Vic out anytime they start going on their little rants. But it's still not enough in this instance, and Sandy, out of pure frustration and just overall just not feeling it, turns her headset off. Like, entirely turns her headset off, much like Stewie would do way later. And she's just debating on the roof where she is, away from the rest of the group, still within earshot, and just kind of like, do I really want to be part of this team? Do I really want to deal with this? Because she's so passive at this point. Like, she'll just let things happen, and maybe they'll work themselves out, but this is the point where she's starting to realize, I should switch teams. I need to be more assertive. And Vic is just yelling angrily from the ground, like, how dare she ignore them? They are her leader, what are you doing? And then Sandy doesn't hear much of it, but she hears expletives, sort of. She figures that's what they're saying. And then Oscar is down there, significantly less audible, but can definitely tell that he's trying to calm Vic down. Then it abruptly cuts to screaming. Okay, what is happening? And it's just a lot of noise and chaos down there, so Sandy just, like, what is happening? She turns her headset back on, and they are both screaming in the headset, because there's a monster down there, and she can just barely see it from a vantage point, because she's supposed to do that as an archer, just kind of do backup, and she sees, like, this giant E-Class just wrecking them, just throwing them around, they are hitting walls, they're hitting random objects, they're doing their best, the two of them, Oscar and Vic. I don't remember what their powers are, it's never really explained, but Vic is definitely a full-body fighter as a brawler, and then Oscar is another archery person, but decided to go with mid-range so that Sandy could get distance. And Vic is just screaming at her, like, even angry, but more panic than anger, just like, don't sit there being useless, shoot it, for Bass's sake. And just overall making everything worse for her, because this is the first proper monster fight where things have started to go sideways that she has ever experienced, and she's just panicking a little bit, starting to hyperventilate. Oscar is trying his best to talk her down, and is like, okay, it's fine, we can handle this, and then, like, Vic's yelling abruptly cuts off. Sandy freezes, that's her fear response, and she shakily asks, like, are they okay? And we cut to Oscar, a close-up shot of Oscar, covered in spores, and then you just see Vic's gear being slapped onto the ground. The monster ate him. And because it's a monster death, which is when the cat gets covered in enough monster spores and fungus, they will not respawn. And Oscar knows this. Sandy doesn't. Oscar is speaking very quietly so the monster doesn't spot them. And he goes, okay, it's fine. Vic respawned, so everything's fine on that standpoint. What I need you to do is take your arrows. Remember the portal arrows that I gave you? Just get yourself out. But wait, I can fight this. I can help you guys. Oscar tries to tell her no, but there's her arrow, and there she comes teleporting over to them, right in the line of sight of the monster, who immediately responds by headbutting her and slamming her to the ground. And the monster's advancing very quickly, like they're about to go for her. So Oscar takes out his crossbow, holds it up, and then Sandy's in the afterlife of life lost thing. This is also where the panel starts splitting in half, where we also see Patch's perspective of her getting launched into the afterlife thing. I think it would be the first panel of Sandy getting launched in, and then it starts splitting as we see Patch's perspective and Sandy's perspective, knowing that the other is seeing... one is seeing the other as their shaky outlines, like with Stewie's perspective. And the same sequence happens, only Sandy is panicking, she's not sure what to do. Patches does her best attempt at being a leader, weirdly enough. Like, she's weirdly good at it, even at 8 months. And Sandy follows suit. Patches pulls back this mystery cat in the middle, and then they both see the skull. They both have their respective very confused responses, and then they wake up in hospital beds. Or rather, Sandy wakes up in hers. We don't quite see Patch's perspective just yet. I'm going to skim through the hospital visit part because it kind of covers a few things that I wanted to accomplish with Sandy and her backstory. So here we go, Cliff Notes. Sandy's mom is one of those child star moms that chucked her and Tigra into damn near everything that she could get her paws on. Yes, she does get better later, but at this point, she is hell-bent on any sort of promotional thing because Sandy and Tigra are related to Lily, and by extension Mildred, which is, yes, I'm going to get interviews, any sort of thing that happens to Sandy and Tigra. It is publicity stunt. Like, she does care about her daughters, like, don't get me wrong. But she is thinking, as soon as she sees Sandy's whole situation, she goes from, oh good, I'm glad you're okay, how can we market this? We also get a glimpse of Sandy and Pickett's complicated relationship, Pickett being Mildred's sister, and just being so uncomfortable over the fact that Sandy nearly died in a very similar way to her sister, and she's just having complicated emotions, but she is also the head fighter, and she has to control herself. But every time she gives Sandy that look, Sandy has registered it every single time. And only now, after seeing how her mom responded to this whole situation, she's kind of hating it now. Sandy gets told that her whole team died, which she's already feeling guilty about. Her mom's whole, let's use this for fame instincts are going insane, and no one likes that. And finally, the doctor in charge shoves all of them out of the room. And then we have a shot of, we don't really see them for a second, and then you look up and, oh hey, it's that same doctor that Suey saw when he respawned. They explain that they were the ones who put the bandages on her hands before she properly woke up, and did the whole, oh yeah, your hands are gonna go numb a bit after a respawn thing with Sandy's mom and Pickett. Once they're alone, they explain that their name is Germaine, and they were Mildred's first kid. Way before the one-night stand that would lead Mildred to have Tabs, Sandy's mom, she had had a partner that resulted in Germaine. And, you know, they had like a traditional, like, they were totally chill. It could have been great, actually. They had such good chemistry. They were a nice, loving couple. Then the fame of being Lily's granddaughter got to Mildred. It stressed her out. She closed herself off. She started backing off. Her partner at that time was starting to get really aggressive about it. Like, what do you do? Like, what are we doing? And they eventually broke it off. Germaine actually saw this coming. They're ice precog. The precog's recessive, so they get a little touch of future vision. So they saw that coming, and as they grew up, they realized they don't want any other cat to deal with that type of stuff. Like, Mildred was just related to an Alpha Trio cat, and she got completely blasted. What if you are one? So they dedicated their life to getting medical training, and eventually becoming head of the EMTs, like the district head or something like that. Not exactly the head medical cat, but definitely part of the seniority group. They bounced around the buffer zone, trying to make sure that any cat that they saw would be an Alpha Trio cat was hidden. They didn't want the cat to have fame, and that was part of why that no one saw any other Alpha Trio after the one from the 70s, Lily, Tamara, and Walter. Or at least the one trio that was a thing, was never really broadcasted outside of their area. Because none of them figured out until after they died, which is happening faster, and it's alarming. And they only tell Sandy this specifically because they are in the same boat. They are, and Sandy is, they are in the same boat as related to Mildred. And they mention that they know who the third one's gonna be. They just not sure when. They're thinking like another 6 or 7 months. They're not entirely sure. But until then, just do not reveal your hands. or, like, things are gonna go insane. They wouldn't explain all of this at once. They would explain the hand bandage thing, and would say, like, meet up with me later. It'll be like an appointment, but I want to talk to you. And then they would explain the rest of this once Sandy's calmed down a little bit. Honestly, this would also be a good time for a montage of, like, Sandy slowly talking to Jermaine and getting an idea of what their whole deal is. And as she's doing this, she's also just now registering all of the junk that has been directed at her. Like, she's noticing why Tigra is so angry all the time, just because, like, she figured out the whole, like, fame thing months ago, and was getting angry quicker than Sandy did. And also, as previously stated, she mentioned how Pickett really, like, looks at her and makes her uncomfortable. She doesn't want to deal with that, and she's withdrawing into herself despite Jermaine's best efforts, because they're not really much of a therapist, and honestly, Sandy should have seen a proper one, but she was still a bit paranoid, because Jermaine said, don't tell people this, so she followed through a little too hard. But instead of that shy withdrawal that she was already doing, she just got tired, even a little bit angry, that she was blind to all of this nonsense. So it goes to, like, a couple months. She's, like, 10 months old. She's probably, like, not in service at the moment because of all that. A combination of Sandy's mom being very, very adamant that her poor, precious, traumatized daughter that totally shouldn't get interviewed, but maybe a little, needs to have rest time. And also Pickett's own trauma based on how Mildred died, which is, again, eerily similar. She doesn't get to do anything for 2 months, and it drives her nuts. But what Sandy can do is train. So for those 2 months, once she figured out what she could do, she just basically went down to the archery range and spent hours upon hours just shooting the arrow at the targets at different directions, just doing everything that she could. She became ambidextrous. She became, like, eerily good at it, in the way that, like, someone who obsessively practices something would be really good at it. And because she's so good at it, she gets a false sense of security, like, around 10, 11 months, like, in that little middle point, and she decides, screw this, I can go on a mission by myself. Mildred did it before with her ice clones. I can teleport around. I can figure this out. I have done more teleporting practice. I'm going to avenge my teammates, damn it. Training area is right above where all the portal rooms are, so all she has to do is go down an elevator to any random one, really. And no one really expects her to actually sneak away from the training room because she's Sandy. She's the perfect child. Why would she ever leave? She was always so agreeable. One thing Sandy's really good at is memorizing stuff, so she also knows how to get into any universe, really. She has the portal arrows. She'll get in there no problem. It'll be fine. She's going to go in, she's going to kill the first E-class she finds, or any monster, whatever, and she's going to prove to everyone that she is not just some prodigy child. Not really realizing the irony, considering she would be going in by herself, so the prodigy person would go in by themselves and do a perfect job, and she's 8 months, or 10 months at this point. That's, like, not even an adult yet. She's still technically a high schooler. So she finds a room, she's setting herself up, and then in comes Patches, who is also a year and 10 months at this point, so incredibly lost. She makes a remark how she's been here for more than a year now, a little bit more than a year, and she still gets so confused by all the hallways and all the doors, they all look the same, and Sandy just kind of was like, okay, and just, like, continues on with what she's doing. Patches questions it, like, what are you doing, actually? And Sandy just very bluntly, very calmly explains what she's doing, going into a universe by herself. Patches is like, alright, anyway, what are you doing? I'm sorry? And Sandy's just like, no, it's fine. I'll be fine. And Patches is like, no one does that. Please don't do that. Sandy only relents because if there's other witnesses, then, God, fine, I won't go in the universe. And Patches is delighted about that, but Sandy's going like, okay, as soon as she walks away, I will get in here and I'm just going to do this universe thing. Only Patches doesn't leave her alone. Sandy just wanders back to the training room, because Patches did say she was lost, so Sandy just leads her back to the training room, so she figures, okay, I'm gonna lead this cat to the training room, ditch her, and then go back to what I was doing. But Patches just sticks on her like Velcro, just constantly redirecting and talking to her just about random stuff on her brain, and Sandy is getting more and more frustrated because, like, when will this cat leave her alone? But they do eventually make it to their destination, and Patches gives away her name. She's like, okay, I'm Patches, by the way. And Sandy says her name, and it's like, oh yeah, your sister, Tigra, she talked about you a lot. She's my teammate, by the way. Sandy had to admit that the fact that she didn't mention a damn thing about being Mildred's granddaughter was actually kind of charming. She was still annoyed by her, though. And then by the time they get back, it is a little too active for Sandy to try and, dip out and go into the universe, so she just goes, well, guess I'll have to try again later. And because she's basically on probation until she can get new teammates, or until she gets a year old and she can do her own thing, she keeps trying to do it intermittently, trying to go on a universe on her own, and Patches just keeps appearing. Like, where's this cat coming from? Sandy doesn't end up getting her new teammates or anything. They just kind of wait out until she's 1. So, for the other 2 months, before she turns 12 months, Patches just will not leave her alone, and Sandy's getting increasingly frustrated by it, so before she does her whole first year graduation thing, she goes, why do you keep following me? And Patches explains that she just had this intuition, which we now know is precog recessive, and that Sandy was in serious trouble. This cat that she didn't know was going to do something that was going to kill her. Like, properly kill her. And she didn't want that if she could stop it. Fiona, Stewie's mom, is Patch's team leader, so she's really showing Fiona's influence here, because Fiona is also a very philosophical cat. But Patches goes, I don't understand what happened to you, but I know that you shouldn't be alone right now, and cats care about you, okay? Just don't forget that. Sandy, still very much in denial, just scoffs at her and just walks off, just awaiting her teammate assignment, her leader assignment, and oh my god, it's Patches, god damn it. They do work things out in the 6 months before Stewie comes in. They go from annoyed at each other, while Sandy annoyed at Patches kind of going with it. The only time that things shifts is when Sandy has a moment of her trauma hitting her square in the face, and she just kind of breaks down a little bit. Patches being very good at panic attack resolving, but not super great at the whole whatever Sandy dealt with, but can certainly empathize because, she got attacked by a monster and respawned. She's explaining one thing, but there's a window shot of her looking at her hands, her looking up at Jermaine, her brothers Luke and Flint doing the whole zipped mouth, we're not saying anything, we're part of this thing. This is the turning point where they become closer than friends, or they actually become friends, and then they get closer, kind of subtly without realizing it. A little bit of it is the Alpha Trio thing, but most of it's organic. And then eventually, maybe around the same time that Stewie's about to join the team, maybe a month before, Patches is getting nervous about the whole team leader thing and getting the recruit. And Sandy does her best way of trying to explain how good Patches actually is as a leader in her own blunt fashion. And it somehow ends up as them being wait, are we girlfriends? Yeah, I guess we're girlfriends. Sure. Yeah, actually, yes. And the chapter ends with Stewie joining the team, and he's kind of being a bit dismissive of them, only for the fact that he just came off of, everyone ignoring him, so he just has that vibe of, they don't know I had a null shirt, so I need to be the best teammate ever, so they don't notice how bad I am with my powers, and if they at any point tell me I can't fight, I'm going to ignore it. But Patches and Sandy don't know that yet. Well, maybe Sandy catches the vibe, but Patches goes, Alright, cool. How do you say cool things? What do you call, hey there, Runt? And he just kind of looks at her and it's like, okay, we're gonna go into our first universe with you. Welcome to the team, Stewie. And she has like a portal door. The portal door opens behind her, and it's the same universe as the first chapter. I think we're gonna have a fun time. And the chapter ends. A little bit of a side note on the monster death thing. Stewie was exempt from that rule because the whole thing with the crystal hit him instead, and he just popped, like, immediately afterwards, so no time for fungus to happen. The real problem is when the gummy monsters hit you a few too many times. Which is why physical altercations, like, you don't punch them directly, you punch them with your powers. You don't actually punch them with your real flesh, well, fur hands. You just don't, because that's one-way ticket to getting spores, and you don't want that. It's also part of why the goggles are a thing, because the monster's fungus thing doesn't have the same vibe as, like, actual fungus, where, like, spores go in the air. It's more like if the gummy bit gets on you for too long, it's gonna mess you up. And the gummy bit getting in your eyes is not great at all. And if you get too many spores or just enough, like, under the threshold, and you still respawn, it's gonna mess up your quality of life a little bit. And, by extension, the waking form. And another side note of Germain's whole deal with trying to hide the fact that the Alpha Trio exists, I'm gonna slightly retcon that and say that, oh, it wasn't that. There's, like, a whole, like, secret society that's trying to muffle them because they're the ones who know the truth of the Alpha Trio and that, like, the monsters go completely insane because they're trying to get at the Alpha Trio. Not just pure coincidental thing. And someone figured it out, like, decades, like, centuries ago, and lost it, and got everyone in a panic. So these guys both hide the fact that more trios have popped up, and also hide the fact that the monsters do that, just so the general public doesn't freak out. They just go like, oh, they're celebrities, and they are the reason that there hasn't been any proper trios that have been found out since, like, there was a 6-year gap, and then we have the Alpha Trio from the 70s, which is where they had a bit of a hiccup, and then they missed it again, and they got the other ones before Sandy Patches Stewie, and Germain got involved with it because Germain expressed interest in it, and they're like, heck yeah, dude, alright, you can be head of the EMTs and be part of our mission to not reveal them. Had I thought of this way earlier, like most of these things, it would be so much cooler to, like, make them part of the system, part of, like, a conspiracy, a little bit, and it would become I can still make this a factor in the end game in this little rambling thing, but I could have just hidden them from the start, like, just kind of bits and pieces of, like, secret society of people hiding what the Alpha Trio really is. Just would have been so cool. I'll probably put them in, like, the near the end as a side note thing, and just pretend that they were there the whole time when I mention that again. Anyway. And finally, we reach Chapter 10. I guess, the Ghost Chapter. That's right, folks, we're hearing the backstory of Ghost now. And it actually runs parallel to Sandy and Patch's whole thing. Mostly that whole first meeting sequence, but a different perspective, where Patches is just chattering incessantly and Sandy's looking very annoyed. And then here comes this other cat, kind of going the opposite direction. She looks like a cat in a lab coat, definitely one of the researchers. She's got a sweater on. And she's a sphinx, which is the most notable thing. She looks like she would be an orange sphinx in the waking world, like one of those sphinxes that would be an orange tabby if they had hair. And she's hiding something. We see a glimpse of something in her pocket. It's a monster fungus. It's in a vial, and monster fungus in the buffer zone rapidly deteriorates. Like, it has a very short shelf life, so she's trying not to make it obvious, but she is also walking very fast. She tries to really casually just put her hand on a doorway or on a wall that opens the doorway because she has cyberkinetic powers, and at some point she figured out how to get a secret door going in there. And once out of line of sight of all the other cats, she sprints. Like, she is running down this hallway, going to and fro, in this little area that was previously decommissioned and finally just skids to a stop in this tiny little lab that she's made for herself. Daisy, who is in this little office, just screams and flails paper around, and this cat comes in. She looks a little bit like, has this laugh of like, I figured it out, I know what we're doing. And Daisy is looking at her like, Madeline, can you chill out a little bit? Just, we can't do this. I know I yelled, but we need to. And then Madeline just cuts her off. It's like, we use G-class gems. What? G-class gems. That's perfect. It's not the gummy fungus stuff. It doesn't get all melted. The gems have a longer shelf life. Let's put that in the vials right now. And as the duo are setting up these vials, like, that are going to become something, we hear Daisy's voiceover. And this is all kind of abridged, so just imagine that Daisy is saying this more like a scientist would, rather than me trying to explain it. But anyway, she goes... She didn't go into specifics as to how her mate died, but I'm thinking his waking form was hit by a car or something. Our dreamer forms wake up, even in brief moments of unconsciousness, so he had just enough time to register what was happening, talk to her, and then just dropped. Obviously, she did not take it very well. That was the love of her life. Someone that she was going to have kids with eventually. But from what I understand after working with her, her brain flipped to, why do we need waking forms in the first place? Why don't we just have our forms separated from each other? Monsters don't have to do that. Monsters can be independent of their waking forms. Why can't we do that? What if I just messed with that? And instead of, talking to someone about her grief, she just went and got really insanely passionate about making hybrids of cats and monsters. And before you say anything, she didn't use anyone else. She just used her own, like eggs and stuff. Oh, yeah, right. You don't know what eggs are. It's a thing that, cats that can have babies have it. The male presenting ones have it too. I'll explain it later. It's very complicated, but she just used her own DNA, basically. And this is about when she started keeping logs. I actually have the audio for this. Just give me a minute. And rather than voice act Madeline's video logs, which would be very cool, honestly, like get a cool effect there, I might just do that as a side project in the future. But she goes on to explain that she has a hypothesis. Can dreamers be spliced with monster DNA? It might work with the whole dreaming waking world switch. Maybe we can spend more time in our dream forms without worrying about disconnecting from our waking form. Maybe they won't die if the waking form gets killed. And she decides, I'm going to take monster DNA from various missions and put them with my eggs and see what happens. Like varying degrees of how much is in there versus like the usual stuff. So we see this montage of her going like making a bunch of batches. She'll maybe repeatedly make a bunch of batches of zygotes, basically, just set up at different stages so she can keep tabs on one as the second one is still getting figured out and the third one is being made, like that sort of thing. So she burns through a lot of batches at once. It's a side project compared to her real researching job, so this is a very long process. It's probably even before Patch's time, where she just kept working at this for what had to have been at least 2 years. A little bit more than 2 years. By the end of those 2 years, she is just so far gone that she has just kind of stopped working normally and just kept doing this. And Daisy, one of her subordinates at the time, was like, where the heck did she go? So she tries to find her, and finds her in the middle of yet another batch, just staring at everything. Madeline is, like, ready to fight her, ready to take her down. It's like, no one is telling anyone my secret. Like, I will take you out if you even think about it. And Daisy's like, I won't, oh my god. And then, Madeline chills out a little bit, still, you can just imagine, she is hopped up on caffeine, and just looking at Daisy like, "Oh, you're Rose, right?" It's like, Daisy, great, Rose, okay, look, listen to my idea. And then she basically info dumps her whole thing about how dreamers shouldn't have to have a waking form in the monster thing and all that, kind of casually not mentioning the fact that she has made dozens upon dozens of these batches. And because she bypasses the fact that she's making kittens and cloning kittens, basically, Daisy kind of just rolls with it. Like, she's spooked by the idea at first, but she thinks, like, okay, I mean, like, I don't know why you were pulling out all the stops just to hide, but honestly, like, this isn't a bad idea. How about I help you out with this? Also, I feel like if I don't help you out with this, you're going to, like... No, you wouldn't. But, yeah, I still need to be careful about this. And then she gets in too deep to a point where now she physically cannot leave because she and Madeline will both go down, and Madeline knows this. And Madeline needs a second set of hands. So she's basically keeping Daisy hostage. Daisy, in a small act of rebellion, goes and actively sabotages any of these experiments that Madeline is making. Eventually, Madeline will figure out, like, oh, this isn't worth it, because, like, they maybe get to, like, embryo stage and then kind of just deteriorate after that. So that has to be getting on her at some point. Like, the guilt must be eating her alive. That has to be the reason that she is also not being great. So she just quietly tweaks stuff here and there to make it subtle, so that when it does eventually fail again, Madeline is still kind of keeping her, but also nothing gets made, and it works for a bit. In the previous instance shown, where Daisy and Madeline are working with a G-class sample, she does actually accidentally make things better. For at least 3 of them. Those 3, much to Madeline's glee and Daisy's horror, make it to just about full term, which is like 3 months for cats? And they are in these little, like, test tube womb things that Madeline set up years ago, and they're just, like, watching in different variations of anticipation as the first one that comes out, and it, like, looks like a normal kitten. It has, like, well, all of them look like Madeline because Madeline's cloning herself, and they think, like, oh my god, it's actually alive. Then it just kind of melts in their hands, and Madeline's like, okay, not that one. She's starting to feel it. She's starting to get guilty about it. Then they find the second one, which looks normal at first. Then, like, 12 eyes pop out of it. Like, the eyes are everywhere. And then it also promptly dies, or would have died anyway, because it didn't have a mouth. It was just eyes. It was just, like, a purple sphinx with eyes. Very gross. And finally, it's like Madeline's conscience and just all of the stuff that she has been doing hit her like a train, and she's, like, just flipped, like, just started destroying everything and just shouting about how we can't do this, we have to hide everything, I can't do this anymore, what have I done, all that type of stuff. And she just kind of bails from the room, probably to get some air or something like that, just all kinds of overwhelmed and stuff, just leaving Daisy there. And she's also still horrified at the whole thing, and just kind of in shock, doesn't know what to do with herself, kind of just gingerly picks things up and moves them around so she can at least get out of the room, and try and debate what the heck she's gonna do now. And then Ghost comes out of the tube thing. Like, she hears the sound of, like when the other 2 were kind of slurping out of the thing, and then the mewling. It sounds like a kitten, but it sounds more like a monster's noise, like a general ambient noise of a monster. And Daisy is like, oh my god, okay, that's a baby, that's an actual baby, I'm gonna pick this thing up, hello, baby. And then there's voices outside, there's security outside, and oh, look at that, it's Olivia, and a few other security guards, because they had seen Madeline, like, sprinting away, and thought, like, what the heck, and, like, followed her trail, and there's Daisy with a baby ghost in her arms. And just the fact alone that she was holding a hybrid that they made with monster DNA is all kinds of screwed up. Like, that's the equivalent of someone trying to clone themselves with alien DNA? I'm not sure. But it's not great. No one likes it. It's very bad. So, like, everyone's crowding around Daisy. Daisy's freaking out. Ghost is freaking out because they are just born. They are fresh kitten. And just all kinds of noise. And then Madeline comes up behind them, sees everything going on, looks Daisy in the eyes, and pins all the blame on herself. She takes the fall. She goes something along the lines of, like, Daisy did nothing. She just found this kitten. This was all me. Daisy had nothing to do with it. I'm sorry you had to deal with everything, low-key apologizing, but I did all of this. It was just me. Don't do anything to her, please. And they listen to that. But there's still the problem of Ghost, and the fact that they're half monster, and the fact that they are a sin against Bast, as Olivia would put it. Some of them refer to Ghost as it, and other ones are using the set of numbers that Madeline had made to try and figure out, like, which one was which. I'm not sure how the 78, 13, 19, 20 applies to the code of, like, this was batch 78, born on December 20th, some other stuff. Like, I'm not sure how that goes exactly. I know the December 20th thing is a thing, but you guys can draw your own conclusions as to what the numbers mean. I still don't 100% remember or even know what the numbers would be and why they're relevant. They just turn out to spell ghost, which is why Daisy starts calling them ghost rather than the numbers. And Daisy sure fights for them because she was the factor that made Ghost happen. So she feels super responsible for it, and also feels very strong feelings about not letting Ghost die because, like, they're a kitten. What the hell? And also, she's kind of their mom a little bit. So she's just really, really passionate. And she does eventually get everything working, obviously. And Ghost is left as, like, an experiment to be observed, just in case they go feral, or just to see what happens. Science. And they did not like any other scientists that were coming in. Like, even Daisy had to combat their tantrums for a minute, and then eventually she was the only one that Ghost really liked, where other people, these cats would get vines darn close to their face, dangerously, dangerously close, and some of it was Ghost didn't quite understand what they were doing, at other times it was intentional, because Ghost didn't like them. And Daisy, taking this as a sort of punishment initially, becomes very bonded to Ghost and works herself ragged because she has to do both her job and keeping an eye on Ghost, and just becomes very stressed and in turn gets herself sick from it, and then it kind of leads into the second chapter where Ghost tries to escape. And then Daisy ends off with, like, did you want to see Madeline? Or, I mean, we don't have to right now. She is kind of real deep in the security area, like in the jail area, but not crazy deep. You'd have to be real bad to do that. But it's gonna take a minute because I gotta get security clearance, and I don't think they're really super keen with me. And Ghost cuts her off with, I'm fine for now. Thank you for telling me. And she just is like, so we're done with this? Okay, I was expecting more of a resistance. And Ghost says something along the lines of, like, I would like to see her, just not right now. I'm still figuring things out. So Daisy just nods like, alright, well, if you do want to see her at any point, just give me a heads up and we can work something out. But don't let our thing be like, oh, I'm like an evil cat because I have the monster powers or because of this happening. No, none of that. Don't even think about that. You are your own cat. You're kind and compassionate, very curious, and you're not going to get, like, all influenced and crazy evil because of these powers. Maybe a little bit of an instinct, but that's something you can work with. Like, everyone has the same power struggles when it comes to, like, say, toxic recessive cats, or some of the other ones that, like, if they're too overwhelmed, their powers go nuts. You are exactly the same as that. Maybe a little bit, like, tweaked, because you're fine. Do not let people knock you down because you're half monster. You are your own cat. You are not the monster. You are Ghost, and you're basically my kitten now? Yes. You're my child, and I love you very much. And then Ghost just kind of, like, also returns the favor and just hugs her, and she's just like, oh, okay. Yes. You know, she's kind of in shock that she just said that, and she's also not used to hugging, but she likes this. And Ghost also is fine with this, but Ghost also still has this pensive look on their face, because they're still kind of grappling with the idea of being half monster. They're still kind of scared of expressing their powers, even more so now that they know the background to what they were doing, and just, well, they're sort of better and sort of not better, but they'll figure it out at some point. In the meantime, that's where this chapter ends. And honestly, I wasn't really sure what to do with Ghost after this point, because the next chapter doesn't really involve them. Or maybe, like, between this chapter and the one I'm about to do next, well, about to do in, like, a month for you guys, it is more Sandy Patches Stewie based, and Ghost is kind of left out. But we'll just pretend that at some point Ghost has a chapter where they grapple with this, and then it works out later. I'll figure it out as I go along, because, as previously stated, most of this, the rest of it thing, is improv, because I honestly didn't think I would get this far in terms of the comic. So let's just see how that works out. In the meantime, thank you for watching this part. Guess what, lads? You know what time it is? It's time for the time loop chapter. The one I have been teasing on and off for years, ever since I conceived it way back in, I'm not sure when that was, but I love Edge of Tomorrow just for the time loop aspect and the whole, like, oh, it's like a video game thing. And time loops in general, time travel in general, I'm hype as all heck about. And yet, despite all of my hype about it, for some reason, it is actually still pretty bare bones. So, bear with me here as I try and piece together this fragmented idea of the time loop chapter. Most of it will make sense. Some of it's going to get a little bit weird, as is the nature of time travel plots, but I will do my best to make it make sense. But anyway, let's get started with this. The chapter picks up right where the previous one featuring them left off, with Germaine giving them the rundown of the whole society thing of, like, hey, they're trying to cancel out the Alpha Trio so no one knows they exist, but, I mean, like, it's not too late for you three, but it's also kind of too late for you three to be separated. And, like, Stewie, remembering the Chapter 2 thing with that weird hooded cat that, like, grabbed at him and told him not to leave the group, this is probably what they were talking about. And he says as such. Patches and Sandy agree, and not only for, like, the whole, well, we're here now, what else can we do? You know, they're dating, so they kind of don't want to split up, even if it would ultimately be for the greater good, but at the same time, what can you do now? All three of them are awake. And Germaine is kind of like, well, they haven't been feeling the society since, like, Sandy's time, because, you know, with Patches, they didn't really know Patches. Patches was, like, a cat from another branch that, when they moved into the one where Sandy lived, but Sandy is their niece, and then that's direct ties to Mildred. So when Stewie comes around, they're like, okay, I'm out. They have their own little, like, mini cluster of cats that they're talking to about this. One of them is Fiona, Stewie's mom, because she has a little bit of precognition when everyone thought she was, like, had something different in her ability. She's actually precog dominant, and just like with Luke, she saw this coming, and she and Germaine have been hanging out and, like, keeping tabs on this whole thing. Not that there aren't any other precogs in this society thing, but for the sake of the argument, the main three right now don't exist as far as they're concerned. But Germaine's not really sure what to do with this, so they and Fiona decide, like, how about you guys just go on as normal, just be a little more aware of things, because the monsters are probably gonna go nuts. and we'll work out what to do. So just, I cannot stress enough, do not tell anyone. And they're all kind of like, yeah, like Sandy Patches Stewie just nodding in agreement. Stewie, tempting fate, because of course he would, he's the protagonist, goes to Patches and Stewie like, yeah, I'm sure we can figure it out. We're the Alpha Trio after all. And then cut to a bit of a montage of like different universes that the trio have entered, and the Y classes are starting to pop up a little bit quicker each time. Like the monsters start off really strong, and then like they're beginning to turn into Y class as they're leaving because they're like, oh, we need to leave. And it also cuts to a bunch of other cats, like news reports popping up and cats scrambling out of universes, like other cats, as the monster frequency gets a little more intense over the course of a month, until finally we hit the end of the month and Sandy Patches Stewie are incredibly guilty and also very scared of the whole situation because they just witnessed a cat come out of a universe who is known to have a very large team without a team because a Z-Class attacked and they were the only one who managed to get out. Patches is the first to break while in private. She's like, we have to tell someone. Like, I don't know how they're supposed to help. Like, they can't really split us up anymore, but we have to tell someone. We have to. Like, I don't. And then Sandy's trying to get her to chill out, but even she's kind of like, yeah, she's got a point. Stewie's on the same boat because, oh my god, what if one of the teams, like, what if Francis's team gets messed up? What if Misty's team gets messed up? And he's coming around to, okay, we should actually tell someone. And then Ghost completely sidelines him, or not sidelines, but distracts him for like a second when they say, hey, I'm doing the recruit assessment sometime today. And Stewie's like, yes, great, fantastic. Cool. Very distracted right now. That's cool, buddy. And Ghost is like a little bit miffed at that, but kind of gets the vibe that something's up with Stewie, and they'll just revisit that later. They eventually make their way to an empty portal room to continue a whispered conversation because cats had very good hearing, only to be completely flabbergasted because where does this cat come from? The main three are caught like a deer in headlights as Gracie explains herself as someone who is doing a report on some random team for a kitten training thing, and she figured, hey, Sandy's my cousin. How about I just go with you guys on a mission or something? I know it's kind of dangerous, but I trust you guys. And normally, Patches in particular would see right through that logic, but they're all so stressed out and, like, they know that if someone is like, why are you whispering to yourselves in an empty portal room? Are you going to go in a universe or what? They all have the same thought of, yes, the universe. Let's go in a universe together right now and away from all of these eyes staring at us. And within minutes, they are inside a universe and ready to go. They almost immediately realize this was a terrible mistake, but they're in the universe now, and they have to commit to this. And Stewie is especially distracted by Gracie because it's like, he swears to God he's seen her before. Because he has seen her before. Because she's Hood Cat, Time Cat, the one that tackled him, and the one that was in knitting. All the same cat. But she's a bit younger than how she was in those times. So he's seeing her before she figured everything out like that. And he's just hanging back a little bit, trying to distract her from Patches and Sandy's whispered, like, anxieties, and just dropping into casual conversation. Mid-conversation, he gets distracted for a second because all three of the main three hear something in the distance, like a big thud, and they're like, oh no. Was that a Z-Class happening? And Stewie is like, oh, hey, Gracie, and Gracie is not next to him. She is 5 feet away, writing furiously in her notebook. He comes up to her like, hey, are you good? Like, doesn't even say anything, just about to say something, glances down in her notebook, and says number 9 on it. He's like, a 9? And she explains, oh, yeah, that's just the list to keep track of interview stuff. I haven't actually thought of question 9, but it'll give me like 5 minutes. And he just kind of shrugs, walks off, knife brandished because he's ready to fight whatever happens. And then when he's out of line of sight, she continues writing something down, and we see from her perspective she has written down a few things that are off focus, but if you look closely, you see something like he dies first, tackle him first. And then something that is very clear is like 1 minute, get ready. And just like that, you hear an even louder thud, only to find a giant Z-class wall pillar thing just starting to form already. Like, not even any sort of, like, monsters popped up at all. This thing just came in from the get-go. And the group is understandably freaked the heck out. So Sandy tries to shoot an escape portal, only to have it knocked right out of her hand. And then just, it's pure chaos. There's 3 pillars that are just immediately coming for them. They barely have any time to respond as Patches gets hit, Sandy gets hit, Stewie merely has seconds because he can speed around, and he looks over at Gracie, who is like charging up with fire for some reason, probably a panic, so he comes over, rams into her to try and like trigger a respawn or something. Like, they're on a cliff. So he's falling down with her in his arms, and the Z-Class is rapidly advancing. It's gonna hit him back in the minute where she was writing notes frantically, and he had lagged behind a second to catch up with her. Now, Gracie doesn't register this because Gracie is a single-minded individual, and she is under the belief system that if she bangs her head against this rock wall enough, it will finally crumble under my force. And she's done this at least 10 times by now. So she's writing down her notes. It says number 10 instead of number 9, and she's writing down something like, "Don't let Stewie tackle me again." No, she's being more vague. She's saying, like, "Don't let him tackle me again." And now Stewie's looking at her with, like, the look of, like, well, he just experienced what she did, too, but she's used to it. He is not. And he's like, "Oh, you got to 10 already?" "Yes, sir. 10 questions. That's what you're supposed to do. Weren't you at 9 earlier?" Now, gears are starting to turn in her head, but Gracie isn't entirely sure if her hypothesis is correct. They hear the thud in the distance like before, but now Stewie is keyed into it because he remembers all of this. Everything is happening the exact same way it happened before, and he's panicking. He's like trying to tell Sandy and Patches, and by extension Gracie, we need to get out of here right now. And then like the monster thing happens again. And while Gracie is doing different things in the background, as she is in every loop, Stewie is panicking. He's like frozen. He's in shock. So she looks at him, charges her powers up. His powers are already going off because that's just an instinctive thing. She grabs him, and then they get pulled back right to that same starting point again. Huh. Well, I'm not sure how that happened, but...
What was that?
Oh, I think our fire ability synced up or something.
We were dying. We were in monster attack. We were dying, and now you're just... How are you fine with this? What is...
Hey, are you guys okay? Okay, just give yourself... Okay, are you over it? I'm gonna let go, and you're not gonna scream, okay?
Blah. What the heck? Are you time dominant or something?
On paper, no. But yeah, I am time dominant.
Look, can we just get this over with? I've already, like, told you maybe a few times, and that's why I kind of stopped telling you, because you respond like that. Can we just get this over with? I know we have, like, unlimited time in here, but I don't like holding this for too long. It gives me a headache.
That was you a month ago!
Huh? There was 2 of you. One of you had, like, the hood on, or is it like a blanket or something. The other one was in knitted gear, and they both said, "I'm on the right track, stay with your group." Like, this is my first time meeting you 3. So, well, I guess it's not the first because of time loops, but you know what I mean. This is the first time meeting you properly. So I'm assuming that came over later, and maybe my future selves will meet, and we're not going to deal with this right now. We're in the middle of something, and y'all are going to die. And then she proceeds to tell Stewie all about the time loop she's been doing, because in the not-so-distant future, like maybe a week after this chapter happens at most, the main 3 are revealed to be the Alpha Trio. Now that they're dead, which sucks, but now that they're dead, they can kind of be like, "Oh yeah, by the way, they were the 3, but can't really do much about it now." And they think like, "Oh, okay, so the monsters won't go nuts anymore, right?" Wrong. There's something crazy happening in the background. Like, from this perspective, at least from Gracie's perspective, we see
Ghost losing their mind because, Stewie just died. Stewie was their best friend. And Miles and Molly are trying to, hold them back from, grieving and stuff. And you think, there's tendrils just going everywhere. The brain just shaking. Everything is falling apart. And so Gracie, in a panic, just time travels back to her past self. But not as a time double, more like a Groundhog Day loop. You are the same soul in the same body sort of situation. And she puts together pretty quickly that the mission that they are currently on, Sandy Patch and Stewie are on, is where they die. So she's like, okay, I'm just going to improvise and get in on this action and try and save them. Easy. It's slightly different this first go-around because there's actually monsters that precede the Z-Class coming around. And they do kind of get hurt quite a bit with the monsters because the monsters are really charged up because of the Z-Class going nuts over the main three. And eventually they get to a point where when the Z-Class happens, none of them are ready. Patches tries to warn everyone. Sandy is trying to get out, but one by one it's Sandy, Patches, Stewie, and then it's going for Gracie, and Gracie back to that point where she was frantically writing notes. Now she only goes back maybe 10 minutes beforehand because doing a week behind, looping back to a week behind, was pretty exhausting because she's not used to her powers yet. So this is all she could manage at this point because she had just jumped maybe half an hour prior to meeting the three. So she doesn't have a lot of time to work with to try and figure out, okay, how do I get these guys to a point where they can actually get out of the universe, because we're in that fun little window where we can't actually leave with the portals because the monster has not been vanquished yet, but we can also only do that when a Z-Class is right on our tails. So much like a speedrunner trying to figure out how to get the fastest way to get through a game, she's trying over and over again to fight off the monsters as quick as possible, so they have that little window of oh, the Y-Class stuff is happening, let's get out of here. And every time, it doesn't end up working. And also the Z-Class is getting a bit faster, which is alarming, but they keep dying, monster death style, and Gracie has to keep coming back, write down her notes, and try again. It's the worst boss battle, considering she has to witness the three of them having conversation. Stewie asking the exact same notepad question every single time, and she has to improvise and change her words or do the same thing because it's not he'll remember anyway about the questions, and it's just really frustrating, and she's kind of at the end of her rope, and then she pulls Stewie back. Well, not on purpose, the first time. So she's initially really annoyed by this because she's God, I don't need to pull anyone else into this. But now that he's in and she's confirmed that she can grab him and put him into stuff with the timeline, she's okay, you know what, I can work with this. Stewie just goes, well, why don't we just go time double like you were saying? And Gracie immediately shoots that down no, we're not doing that. Because every time you do that, you have to follow a stable time loop. You have to follow what the first one is doing so they can go back and become the second you that does the same thing. It's really frustrating. Let's just do it this way. We're going to figure this out together now. And of course, the next maybe 5 or 6 times it doesn't work. There's even a point midway through where Stewie and Gracie are arguing with each other in a darn near shouting match. And then Patches and Sandy are what are you doing? You guys just met. And they both say shut up, and then just kind of and they wasted time. They're oh, for God's sake, and then they loop back again. And some of the loop backs are a little bit comedic, some of them are close misses, and it's a bit of a mess. So we finally reach the end of their loops where they start giving up almost because none of this is working. I don't understand. Why can't we do this? Gracie being why isn't my method of doing the exact same thing 20,000 times in the space of this window each time? Why is that not working? And Stewie just goes, look, okay, we've tried everything else. Let's just try the time doubles. I know how much you hate it. Let's just do time doubles. I think, our problem is the fact that we can't go back far enough as what we are doing now with the time travel now. What if we went back as doubles? Would that take up less energy? And Gracie, despite herself, just begrudgingly says yes. fine. We'll do that, and we're gonna see if that works, and if not, we have to replace ourselves, and then we have to start looping again. I hope you're okay with that. And Stewie's fine with it, because what else is there to try? So they reach the original loop back point, but as doubles this time. And they keep tracking as the group does what has to be the first loop before everything happened. And at this point, they had been experimenting with syncing up their abilities, so Stewie's like, I have an idea. Charge me up with your time abilities, and then we're both gonna grab one of each and pulling them back to the start, and we could, like, I don't know, pull them into the portal just as we are leaving the portal for the first loop. So they do so, and they run around in hyperspeed as Stewie grabs Patches and Gracie grabs Sandy, and the both of them inadvertently cause what first Gracie saw, which was Sandy, Patches, and Stewie all getting killed by monster tendrils, but if you looked closely in the first scene, you actually saw, like, bits of energy wisping off. And then their ultimate plan was to bring them to the portal and shove them out of the portal that the group had just walked out of, like, seconds earlier, just as they're out of line of sight. And this gets confusing, I apologize, but I'm trying to make this as concise as possible. But the real stable time loop was Gracie 1, seeing Sandy, Patches, and Stewie die. She panics. She goes back. She loops 9 times in, like, a self-contained timeline in that 10-minute interval that we keep seeing. She grabs Stewie on accident. Stewie is also brought into this another 9 times, so they looped 18 times collectively in this little self-contained timeline. And then Stewie 2 and Gracie 2 come back from this 10-minute loop as time doubles, and they go over. They realize, oh my god, we can get Sandy and Patches if we just charge ourselves up enough. They grab Sandy and Patches, they pull them back to the start of the mission, with Stewie 3 and Gracie 3 seeing their second iterations in the background and thinking, oh, this is weird. And then they all jump into the portal just after the original iterations go off and do the mission to fulfill Gracie seeing that loop for the first time, and then it just starts again. Also, the time double thing is resolved because Stewie 1, before he got grabbed back in the loops, he dies in this first iteration, because despite all the time powers being all loosey-goosey, the universe itself still tries to correct itself, so it knew that Stewie 2 and Stewie 3 were bouncing around from an alternate timeline, so they just took Stewie out the first time and everything's resolved now. But in that short interval, where Stewie and Gracie were moving at hyperspeed because of how charged up they were, all 4 of them, well, Sandy, Patches, and Stewie mostly, Gracie doesn't quite understand the context, are looking into this monster gunk, this wall, as it's advancing towards them. And it's almost like hollow in the center? Like as if something is contained in like a bubble of this stuff. And they look into it and it's like, is that a cat in there? What? And before they know it, they are at the portal and getting brought back into the buffer zone almost immediately after they left. Gracie is exhausted. Sandy, Patches, and Stewie are also in shock, trying to process what they just witnessed, and something clicks in their head. They have a very foggy memory of the respawn void when that cat skull thing was trying to reach them and it was yelling things at them. And they also have an incredibly faint flicker of a memory where they were not getting their hands sucked into a portal. Those were arms. Those were paws grabbing them by the arms. And Sandy, Patches, and Stewie are now clearly remembering all of the shouting that was going on in that respawn void. It wasn't yelling in anger. It was yelling in fear. And their voices were layered over another voice. All of them were scared. They were trying to grab someone. And as they hear a distant thud, along with a bunch of metal screeching and some of vibrating as the building starts to shake, they have one thought running through their heads.
the fourth cat, Twig, is here. And they're really pissed off.